Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Community Task Force on Policing's meeting number 4. The time is 6:02, and we're going to be calling things to order. I'm Larry Schooler from the facilitation team, but I want to know that going forward, we are hopeful that newly selected Chair Krigler will be calling meetings to order. We decided that she shouldn't be put on the spot moments before the meeting to know everything that needed to be said. But from here forward, I think the chair, co-chair, and the spokesperson will be bringing us to order, and we certainly look forward to that. Chair Krigler, co-chair Cordova, and spokesperson Blaylark. So I'm going to just bring up our agenda for the evening and put it on screen for primarily the public to be able to see. I know that folks were sent a copy of the agenda and the minutes ahead of this meeting, so hopefully this is familiar to you. We're also going to go over the box drive in just a moment, but after we go through the agenda and approve the minutes, we'll check and see if we have anyone here for public comment. We'll walk through the use of that shared drive. We'll then go to Councilmember Powell's presentation on the Civilian Review Board discussion, then take a break, then come back with Chief Lawley's overview of the K-9 program and opportunities for discussion there, and then determine our next steps in the conversation that we're having around accountability. So we intend to finish at 8, and the facilitators will do our best both to give everyone who'd like to speak an opportunity as well as keep us on track. Are there any questions or comments or suggested changes to the agenda? Oh, Co-Chair Cordova.
No suggestions regarding the agenda. I did want to let everybody know that Task Force member Penelope Williams has informed me that she will not be in attendance, and I just wanted to let everybody know.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, we appreciate it. I know these meetings are hard to keep on the calendar. Anybody else on the agenda? Very well. So I think that'll take us to the discussion agreements. Just briefly, these are familiar. We have talked about them a few times, but for your and the public's benefit, we want to just share them again as a way to create the brave space that we're hopeful to have during our discussions tonight. And we very much appreciate everyone contributing to that space being created and maintained. All right, so I will stop the share at this point. I think I'm going to turn things over. Is it to Sarah Omar, my colleague? Yes, Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Larry. We did send around an email about 2 days ago sending a link to the box, and that is where we will be hosting and placing all materials moving forward, including meeting minutes. And the process moving forward is that we ask everyone to review the meeting minutes before each upcoming meeting. And then if you have any objections to the meeting minutes, you can say so. If not, we will assume that everyone approves the minutes and we can move forward. I didn't want to take a few moments to kind of walk through the box, just if anyone has any questions on where things are housed and how the organization of the box. So I will be sharing my screen. So the email that I sent, and I'm happy to resend it to anyone who hasn't received it, will take you to a box that looks like this. There is a folder titled Meetings, and then if you go in that, there will be subfolders for each meeting, from meeting 1 to as many meetings that we'll have. So for this week, last week's meeting, which was October 21st, you can see meeting 3 minutes are located here, and then they're quite thorough, and everyone had a chance to review them. I just wanted to pause here and see, does anyone have any objections to the meeting minutes for meeting 3? Great. So this will be the organization of every folder moving forward. There will be the minutes, the presentation that was shared, and just the agenda or any other relevant materials that were discussed during that week. And then handing things over to Norma to just walk through other materials are in the box.
Sorry, I have my mute button on. Yeah, we also included the scope of work for the task force meeting inside the box folder as well, and also a copy of the ordinance. This is actually in the box folder. The scope of the work for the police task force is also located on the police task force website as well for the city of Elgin. So it's in a few locations as well. So we just wanted to make sure that we're providing the materials and resources for you all to have access to it quickly.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to pause here. Does anyone have trouble accessing the box or have any questions about how the box is organized? All right, I see no questions. I do want to pause and see if there's any members of the public who would like to comment. Right. Hand things over to Larry.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Guess we already we've sort of tackled a bunch of things all at once there, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Thanks to Norma and Sarah for all of that. I just want to acknowledge that we know we're throwing some different forms of technology at you. I think the main goal we have is to just streamline your inbox and keep the number of things you have to keep up with to a minimum. Hopefully you can bookmark the box drive, know that you can always go to it and it'll be updated with the most recent information that you need. Of course, if you need something emailed to you, we're more than happy to do so. You can just reach out to us directly via the policing task force email or any of our direct addresses. But we're hopeful that that drive will make things a little bit easier. You just go to your web browser, open that, and you're good to go. So tonight, as I mentioned, we really have two significant topics to delve into, both of which came up during meeting number 3. One of which is the extensive work, as I understand it, that's gone into discussions about a civilian review board for the Elgin Police Department that Councilmember Powell has been at the forefront of. And so we have asked her, and she has agreed to provide an overview to the group as it relates to the work that's been done to date, with the idea that we'd like to allow task force members to ask questions, certainly of her and other members of this group who have been part of it, and also to share feedback to see where the task force's own work might fit into the work that's already gotten underway with the Civilian Review Board. So because we're so ahead of schedule, we've got a good chunk of time here, both for presentation and discussion. I'll keep my eye on things, but I think we'll be able to take ample time to make sure that anyone who wants to share feedback on this or get a question answered can be heard. And I just want to, before I turn things over to Councilmember Powell, I just want to make sure to encourage every single task force member to take advantage of any opportunity where you have a question or comment to raise your hand, and let's do so. You know, we really want to make sure as facilitators that everyone feels like they are a part of this conversation. So we may not do round robins where we go around and ask each person for a comment in turn, but we definitely want to hear from anyone who has something they want to share. So Councilmember Powell would love to hear from you, and then we'll have questions and discussion.
One question I had, Larry, did you want me to share my screen, or were you going to put it up?
I'm absolutely fine either way. Oh, Sarah's got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, actually, before Councilmember Powell, I apologize. I just teed you up there so nicely. I think it would be nice, just briefly, if we could sort of formally acknowledge Chair LaJewel Krigler, Co-Chair Cordova, and Spokesperson Blaylar. As everyone knows who watched last meeting or was part of last meeting, they were selected in those roles by this body. We've had an opportunity to meet with the three of them and discuss roles and responsibilities. And going forward, I think you're going to see a lot more of them in the way that these meetings are run. We're here to, sort of lead from behind or support the work alongside. So Chair Crickler, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say before we get into Councilmember Powell's presentation, but just wanted to recognize you as the new chair. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
No, I just wanted to say that thank you again for acknowledging me, and thank you for those who voted for me. I'm going to try my best to do, what we need to get done. So I'm excited and ready to go. But at this point, I want to hear Councilman Powell.
Okay.
So thank you very much. And Ishmael and Walter Blaylock, I am looking forward to working with the both of you as well. So thank you very much.
We really have a wonderful complement of the three of them. They bring such great complementary things to the table. Also want to welcome Kat Calamer that I saw join us there just a minute ago. Kat, you're always welcome. Okay, Councilmember Powell.
Thank you, Larry. And first of all, before I get to the presentation, I just want to acknowledge some folks that have been actually working on building a framework for consideration for the task force for some time now. Councilman Corey Dixon, who I'm quite sure is watching on YouTube live today, myself, Chief Lally, our former Deputy Chief, oh goodness, he goes to West Chicago, and then all of a sudden, Colin Fleury, thank you. Colin Fleury was a part of this group, as well as our community engagement specialist, Bob Witt, who I'm quite sure is watching as well. We met on several occasions over the past probably 18 months, looking at different versions of police civilian review boards that exist in the state of Illinois to kind of get a framework for what's out there, what's allowable within the state of Illinois, and what we've heard feedback from in our community about what our citizens are interested in having in a civilian review board. So with that said, you can go to the next slide. I just want to make sure that we started this process with the idea of kind of doing a lot of the background work, because it was a lot of background work, but always with the understanding, especially once we knew that we were going to have this police task force, with bringing it forward to the task force for the task force's input, feedback, and final recommendations on how this would eventually move forward for consideration by the whole council. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So a lot of folks may not understand exactly what a police review board is. So what I tried to include a definition. This would be a set up like a city board and commission with subpoena power. It would be established by the mayor and city council. And we're calling it the EPCRB, which is the Elgin Police Citizens Review Board, would be charged with providing a fair and independent process for review of citizen complaints regarding sworn police officers. Next. There are a number of communities within the state of Illinois that have similar review boards, and I've listed a lot of them on this page. Probably the most notable, I would say, that we really like their framework and used a lot of in building what you're going to see tonight is the city of Champaign, and most recently the city of Aurora adopted a plan as well. Some of the other cities, I'll note that Urbana and I believe Peoria, the way their programs are set up, they're set up more as appeal boards versus a review board, where if once a resident makes a complaint, it's investigated, a decision is made, their boards a lot of times only come into play if the resident is not happy with the outcome of the investigation and what happens and, you know, the discipline. Their boards are more kind of, like I said, set up in that manner versus some of the other ones. Next. So a couple different missions and objectives, just wanted to cover real quickly. Just providing a systematic means by which we can achieve a continuous improvement in our police and community interactions, providing oversight of police investigations involving civilian complaints, overseeing and monitoring a tracking system and receipt of complaints against sworn officers, providing an independent process for review. And probably the most important thing that we've heard from folks is just adding a civilian perspective to the evaluation of complaints, which currently does not exist right now. Next. It also would provide, you know, just timeliness and a fair, objective way to look at these complaints, promoting public confidence and accountability in the police department, providing policy recommendations. That's another component of this group that would be included as well. And ultimately providing recommendations to the city council, city manager, and police chief concerning response to resistance incidents as well. So we started with looking at the composition of what this group would look like, and just talking to a lot of the different communities that currently have them in place. Keeping it to a manageable number of folks was important. Again, feedback and input from this group is important as well. We envisioned it being about a 7-member board that would be appointed by the city council, similar to our other boards and commissions. Members must live within the corporate city limits of Elgin. And one of the things we did differently, which kind of mirrors the way our Fire and Police Commission is set up, we have some specific appointments to ensure diversity on this board. So of the 7 members, we said that no less than 2 shall be women, no less than 3 shall be members of a racial minority group as defined by EEOC. No less than 1 person shall be between the ages of 21 and 25 years of age. We thought that that was specifically important to include young people in this mix, in this group, because they provide a valuable perspective and also unfortunately comprise a large number of the interactions between residents in our community and the police department. So we wanted to make sure that they were represented. We also wanted to include a licensed attorney as well. Next. The terms would be for approximately 3 years and they would be staggered. And typically when you start a new board or commission, not all of the terms are for 3 years. Some are for 1, some are for 2, some are for 3, so that you provide that staggering, so that not everyone is expiring at once. The other component is there's usually term limits. People would be limited to 2 consecutive terms or a maximum of 6 years. The mayor and city council would select a chair and the group would designate a co-chair. We would also have a city council member that would serve as like a non-voting member as a liaison to the group, but again, as a non-voting member. And then there would also be staff liaisons, potentially from the HR department, legal department, Elgin Police Department, and the manager's office. And prior to appointment, the members would be subject to an interview and a background check that would be done by an outside agency. It would not be done by the Elgin Police Department. Next. Requirements. And this is something we saw pretty universally on the current boards that we looked at across the state, that they had requirements and expectations of the people who sit on this board, as people who possess a reputation for fairness and integrity. They can't be a current city employee. There are even some that restrict people who are elected officials, like in other capacities, from serving on the board. And you cannot be currently contracted or working for or have any official affiliation, current or former, with a law enforcement agency. They wanted this to be strictly citizens, not people who are officers, used to be officers, or work in some type of law enforcement capacity. Next. Very similar to what we went through with this task force, this group would be subject to the Open Meetings Act and would be required to participate, or yes, expected to participate in community events to provide public education on the complaint process and encouraging residents to speak up if they have problems or ask questions of members of this group. They would also go through an overall orientation of the Elgin Police Department, their policies and procedures, use of force policies in particular. They would go through the firearm simulator training that the department offers and do a ride along. There's also other training that could potentially be included, some ongoing training, including training from some outside agencies besides just the Elgin Police Department. Next. Now, duties and responsibilities. This was something also that was very important when I talked to some of the other communities, that the expectation is that members conduct themselves at all times in a manner that maintains public confidence and impartiality and integrity, since they're going to be involved in very sensitive and confidential manners, investigating complaints coming in from the public. And the expectation was that members should refrain from prejudicing or making any comments about any pending complaint, ongoing investigation, or anything that could potentially be a problem with a current investigation or the work and their duties as a board member. Next. And I think I already mentioned the importance of maintaining confidentiality with respect to confidential and privileged information. But wanted to make sure that I pointed out that this was not intended to prohibit members from expressing opinions regarding just general patterns and trends in policing, procedural matters, any information that has previously been released as public record, or any other non-confidential or non-privileged information discussed during the course of those proceedings or deliberations. Next. The members would also be prohibited from having any ex parte communications with any third party regarding any complaint under active review. A member shall recuse him or herself from consideration of a complaint which the member has a personal, professional, or financial conflict of interest. And reviewing response to resistance reports where the members deem appropriate and make recommendations to the city council and chief of police is something that this group would also be involved with. I think we looked at that probably like on a quarterly basis. Next. These meetings, a lot of them vary, looking at most of the communities, but would meet probably no less than every other month or 6 times per year. And obviously special meetings can be called as needed, particularly when an actual complaint has been filed and needs to go through the process. And these meetings, again, are open to the public to the extent that, except for when you are discussing specific complaints that would not be subject to the Open Meetings Act. It would be an exemption, and you would go into closed session. Next. And I hope everyone can see some of these. Just kind of walking through the complaint review procedure. Complaints can be filed through the city's website. There's a link on the webpage, and I know that a couple of folks right here on our task force are some of the community members that have been trained in how to take complaints from the public if they are not comfortable going to the police department. I've provided a link to that, and folks can go to that if they would like, and we can even go to it during the course of the meeting later on if that's something that folks are interested in. Complaints would be received by the board staff liaison and then distributed to the board for further review and consideration. And then they would be referred for investigation. And there's currently a two-tiered investigation process. There's an internal process that is performed currently by the Elgin Police Department for minor issues. And then just within the last year or so, we made a change at the city council level and hired an outside investigative entity to provide investigations for more serious issues, to provide a more independent look at those issues that would be a lot less subjective in the eyes of the public. And I think Chief Lally is here. If you want to jump in, Chief, and mention which particular infractions go outside and what's investigated inside, that would maybe be helpful.
Yes, hello. Hi. So, so per the city ordinance, certain investigations have to be sent to the outside law firm that the city has retained. These investigations include any type of use of force, any type of civil rights violation, any allegation of misconduct, and or any type of conduct that would warrant 3 days or more discipline. So any complaint that comes in and falls into those categories, these are then sent to the outside investigative firm who conducts the investigation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the next step is the investigative entity performs an investigation and would bring that back to the board for their review. Now, the complaint review procedure, the board will have access to review all the documents, the statements, body cam footage, and any other information, including potentially disciplinary history of the officer, prior complaints filed against the officer and their disposition, employment history, years of service, positions held, all of that stuff, and would have the ability to subpoena witnesses if needed. Next. The next portion of the complaint review procedure would include the board making a recommendation to the chief of police of one of the following 5 recommendations: either sustained, the complaint was either unfounded, the person is either exonerated, it's not sustained, or is a policy failure. And I will also ask for Chief Lally to kind of jump in and provide a layman's explanation in terms of each of those 5 findings. If you could, please, Chief.
So the When an investigation is concluded, there's a final disposition. And so there's 5 categories. So sustained means that the allegation that it occurred, there's some type of policy violation. So in essence, that what is alleged did happen and that the officer violated some type of policy or procedure. If a complaint is unfounded, that usually means that there isn't, unfounded means that there isn't enough evidence presented to sustain the allegation. And so unfounded necessarily means that the incident could have happened. However, there's not enough to prove otherwise. Exonerated means that the allegations did not happen, that the officer acted appropriately, did not violate any type of policies or procedures. Not sustained means that the event did occur. However, there's not enough there to say that the officer violated any policy or procedure. And then last category is policy failure. So these happen not really that often, but there might be some type of action that an officer takes. And in reviewing our policies and procedures, we determined that we have none or haven't addressed that certain circumstance. And so the officer doesn't necessarily do anything because there isn't a policy, so they can't violate a policy. So it's usually then that we revise some of our practices, and in that we change the policy. So those are the categories. Again, there's several nuances between some of the categories, but in general, if an officer has been found to have done what is alleged, more than likely the complaint will be sustained. If the officer has not been found, that they violated policy or procedure, they would be exonerated. So it's usually one of those 2 categories.
Thank you, Chief. Next slide, please. And as part of that recommendation, if it's sustained, the board will provide the chief of police with a recommended disciplinary action based on one of the 4 following actions, whether it's a verbal warning, a written reprimand, a suspension more than 3 days up to and including termination, or if they would be recommending termination. Next. The board can also recommend further training, counseling of the officer, review of department policies and procedures, so that it's not just necessarily punitive. It includes counseling and potential review of policies and procedures that may have been found to be deficient and led to the action that took place. The chief of police shall then make a final disposition on the case after receiving the investigation and the recommendation from the board. If the chief is in agreement with the recommendation from the board, the chief shall notify the board in writing of this final determination and move forward with said discipline and said action. If the chief is not in agreement, then the chief shall notify the board, and a meeting will be set to further discuss the recommendation. The board shall notify the complainant of the determination once it has been completed, and the person making the complaint will have 72 business hours to appeal the decision back to the board. Next. We thought it would be important for the board to make quarterly reports back to the city council on specific items. Response to resistance data provided by the chief of police on a regular basis, as well as a summary of all the cases presented to the board to include the final disposition of all cases that they've seen within that period, recommendations made by the board on all the cases, the recommendations made by the chief on all the cases, and the number of pending cases that they're still working on. And we also thought it would be important for the board to report instances in which the board and the chief's recommendation varied, and what the final outcome of those situations and what they were in those instances. Next. A couple of important things I really want to point out, just from discussions I know that I've had with folks in the community about this board and the function and how they work. A couple of different things just needed to kind of point out. A complainant can withdraw their complaint in writing at any time during the process. So if they change their mind and don't want to go through the complaint process, they can. However, as I'm sure anyone here can attest and realize, even though the complainant might decide they don't want to go forward with the complaint, if the board or the chief of police feels that the complaint that's been brought forward is serious enough, they may decide to continue with the investigation, because someone maybe gets scared and doesn't want to go through it anymore. We, as the board or the chief, may recognize the need that if it's serious enough that it's something that we need to address. And the board review of complaints may be suspended if the complaint is determined to be criminal in nature or there is a pending civil action against the city. In those cases, any type of review would have to wait until the criminal or civil action had been completed, and then this portion would have to take place after that. It could not run concurrently or before. The board would not have any jurisdiction over complaints or allegations concerning civilian personnel. This is just dealing with sworn police personnel. And the reason why this would be a recommendation by the board for action that would go to the chief of police is pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement. Only the chief of police and the city manager can impose discipline on officers. And that's not unique to Elgin. That's pretty much the case with all of the different communities that we looked at that had similar boards. Next. Now, there may be certain, we call them incidents of community interest that may not be a formal complaint that comes before the board, but maybe it's a trend that we're seeing in our community that has caused public concern or interest. The board may ask the chief of police to report to the city council or to this board on an incident prior to any final disposition on an incident. So if, the board can also kind of self-generate incidents that it wants to look at to a certain degree as well. And finally, anti-retaliation. We wanted to make sure that anyone who filed a complaint or brought anything forward, served as a witness, felt safe and that they would not be retaliated against. So we wanted to make sure that there was some type of anti-retaliation statement and component as part of this board. And I believe that's the last slide. It's a lot, but it took some time definitely to look at some of the different programs that are out there, what could and could not be done in our community, and just thinking in terms of just some of the things that we've heard from members of our community that they really wanted to have some type of say-so in how complaints were being handled and recommendations on the disposition of those complaints. So I will stop talking and allow folks to ask questions and have feedback at this point.
Councilmember Powell, that was, in my non-neutral opinion, an excellent presentation. And I know that you were assisted in this work by, was it Task Force Member Battles that was working on this with you? I can't recall who all from our task force was part of the conversation.
Actually, I don't think anyone from the task force was part of the conversation. There was Councilman Dixon, our community engagement specialist, Bob Witt, but I mentioned task force member Battles, task force member Banner, went through like a community training process with our police department to be able to take complaints from the public, because there was a concern that some people may not want to go to the police station, and they may not feel comfortable going to the police station to make a complaint against the police,
Right.
Understandably. So I know they're part of a larger group of folks that has that training and has definitely been acting in that role as an intermediary for folks in our community.
So one or two other quick things before I turn to the comments and the questions. First of all, we will upload, with Councilmember Powell's permission, we will upload her presentation to the Box folder, Councilmember, if that's okay with you, just so that folks
Absolutely.
can review it at their leisure. And then secondly, I wanted to point out to you all that enumerated in your scope is specifically a model for a formal civilian review of police matters. So in reality, what we've done here is a sort of two birds with a single stone, if I can use that metaphor. We've been talking about accountability, but you also were tasked with, as I say, coming up with a model for a formal civilian review, and that's very much what's in play here. So I think we're making some good progress on your scope of work. So I've got a couple of Zoom hands. Can I just see who all else might have a question or comment so that I can plan accordingly? So I've got Task Force Member Banner, Calamer, Haben, Zaldivar. Anybody else? Task Force Member Areola, Task Force Member Horton. Okay, so we'll start there. And Task Force Member Banner, I've got you first, sir.
All right, so after the George Floyd, every city scurried to put together something that was acceptable, that was comfortable, right? I did meet with Councilman Corey Dixon and Councilwoman Carol Rauschenberger, and I see a lot of the things that we talked about are some of all of the safe things, I would say, are inside this model. But all this model is another dog and pony show, obstacle course, right back to the same place that we're at today, where the citizens don't have any power, have no say, right? And when we talk about what we can and can't do, we can do anything with the power of the pen. It just takes people who are willing to fight for it, right? To create the framework and push the framework through the process to where it can be accepted. You know, whatever the collective bargaining things are, all of that stuff can be renegotiated, right? The structure of city manager, all of that stuff can be restructured and reorganized, and a lot of things can be done where things can be put in place, where what truly needs to be done is where the people actually have the power and the final say of who are policing their neighborhoods. One of the biggest problems with the police, and even with the police chiefs have said that themselves, is the binding arbitrators. We have these binding arbitrators who come from out of nowhere. They have no skin in the game in the city or in the community, and they make the final decision based on whatever reasons they come up with that are, you know, good for them, but not necessarily good for the community. And they make decisions that we have to live with. So we need to get to a place where the citizens who are being policed have the say in who's policing their neighborhoods. I don't like the terms where, you know, no more than or no less than 3 minorities, right? That's anybody. There should be things that are specifically speaking about Black folks. Why are we afraid to stand up and give Black people what they need, or give Black people the power to have oversight of law enforcement over policing their neighborhoods and going through all these forced engagements, right? That needs to be in there, not any old minority, right? I see they have no problem putting women, right? Women are also considered a minority, but they specified women. Everybody's quick to specify everybody except for Black folks, when Black folks are usually the victims of whatever it is that we're talking about. So I think that, you know, you guys are trying to, you know, do what everybody else is doing in every other city, come up with all these safe plans that everybody's comfortable with. And I've said it before, if the people in power are comfortable with the changes that are being made, there's no change at all, because change is an uncomfortable thing. And if people in power are not uncomfortable, then nothing has changed. So I'm against this whole thing here.
So
Well,
what are your
obviously-
recommendations specifically, Marcus, besides you said specifically
So my recommendation,
specifying.
my recommendations would be, if there's going to be an investigator, we should have people, former military people, who have no connections to law enforcement, who have no friends on the police department, who have spent no time becoming friends. Because when we get back to the same point where friends are investigating friends, or if they're not investigating friends, still having the final say in how their friend is being disciplined, right? We have a history of this. Look at the Dar thing. Look at the Woods thing. Those officers should have been fired on the spot and not allowed to resign so they protect their employment records.
So Marcus, I think what she said. I think what
and he stole money from the
Marcus, let me step in for 1 second.
A pension on the city dollar.
Marcus, let me step in for 1 second, because I have 7 other hands up. I also think the council member is asking you, and I think you're providing it, what should change in the proposal that she's bringing forward. So I heard you say explicitly representation by African Americans. I also heard you say the engagement of a former military officer in the with no ties to EPD in the investigation process.
Just have the final say. The citizens are the binding arbitrators. That's
okay.
In there.
All right. We'll have more opportunities for you to share, but I really I can hear the passion, Marcus, and I hear the feeling, and your comments are noted. So let me go to Task Force Member Calamer, then Task Force Member Haven.
First of all, thank you, Councilwoman Powell, for your presentation. It was very thorough, and I thought it offered a good explanation of the process thus far. I just wanted to ask you, did you get any feedback from any of the communities that you surveyed? What has worked, what hasn't, what some of the challenges are that maybe they've come across? What are some of their successes?
Yeah, good question. Had some good conversations specifically with the city of Champaign, and this has been quite a while ago, most recently with Aurora and even with Peoria about their programs. Some of the ones that are more, as I indicated earlier at the onset of the presentation, where they're really not involved at the beginning of the complaint process. Some of them are only involved if someone wants to appeal the complaint. They're not finding that to be what they really originally intended for it to be. So, and that's not at all what we ever wanted to set up. So that's why we kind of stayed away from that. They did, speak to the amount of staff time and support needed to make this operate well. Some use their own internal Office of Professional Standards person to conduct the investigations. Some use someone over in the police department to conduct the investigations, which kind of goes to, I think, one of the issues that that Marcus Banner brought up regarding, who's doing the investigations. And I thought I tried to make that clear at the beginning that there's an outside law firm that the city has hired just within the last year and a half that is currently conducting our most serious investigations. So they do not have any affiliation with law enforcement. That was something very specific that was written in the RFP for that work. So anything that would be very serious would be sent to that investigator to conduct those investigations. Some of the other feedback that we got from those communities is also trying to make sure that a process is set up to ensure confidentiality of especially the complainant, and then also to a certain degree the officer that is being investigated as well. So, you know, a lot. It's a big process. It's a big step, and I'm sure, you know, we could even have some of those folks participate, and you know, we can invite maybe some of them to come and participate in a future task force meeting. I've already kind of broached that subject with a couple of them, so we can maybe get into the weeds a little bit more with some of them on how their programs are set up and what they would recommend.
Task Force Kamler, are you complete?
Thank you.
One thing I was just discussing with my colleagues that I'll endeavor to have in place after we come back from break is a way for us to visibly, for everybody's benefit, capture ideas that are coming from you all about the model that Councilmember Powell is presenting. So both the public and you all can see that we're tracking all of the suggestions that are being made, and then eventually the task force can work through those and determine what they'd like to put forward.
Yeah,
so,
and I'll just also say, you know, I'm taking notes as well. And Marcus, I hear you loud and clear. I know we've had some of these conversations. This was put together based on things that exist right now. There's still at the state level, there's a police officer's Bill of Rights, and that's built into the state statute that gives police officers a certain amount of due process. So a lot of this stuff some stuff is within our control locally. There are other things that are beyond our control and at the state level. And yes, so there are some things that, you know, there was a lot of police reform that happened in Illinois within the last year. And it was a first step. It was a gigantic step, but there's still more to come. But in terms of right now, the way the collective bargaining unit, the way the collective bargaining agreement is set up, the only two people that are allowed to provide discipline at this point are the chief of police and the city manager.
and
That's not to say that should this body decide that when they put this together and decide to move forward, if they want to request that they have total control over, you know, providing that type of recommendation, that is something that's a mandatory subject of bargaining in the state of Illinois. That is something that would have to be bargained with the police union.
And
So
I think
that's something that
yeah.
we would be able, you know, I'm just throwing that out there just to make sure people understand that the process for making these types of things work.
Yeah, I think what I was hearing in that exchange was, you know, at least from task force member Banner's standpoint, regardless of obstacles to implementing some of those potential changes, those obstacles should be tackled head on. And what I hear you saying is there's a lot of work that has to be done to tackle those. I shouldn't say obstacles; those matters, those parts of the ecosystem, as it were. So, just noting, folks, that we do have 6 more folks, which is great. I want to just get a quick show of hands if it's okay if we continue with these 6 as opposed to taking a break right now. We can certainly take a break after that, but it seems like we're in a good discussion spot. And so thumbs up if we can continue, or if we need. Okay. All right, we'll continue with these folks, and then we might take a break once we get through their comments. Task Force Member Haben, please.
Sure. I wanted to say first, thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you, Tish. You know, I'm not going to get real formal here. That was a very comprehensive presentation, and it was very thoughtful. And I know how much has to go into designing this. I feel sort of compelled to say, I looked at your presentation and this work as this is like a jumping off point now for the task force. And we can kind of take what you've done and work with you and flesh it out, have the big discussions, and this could be a great subcommittee project. And so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Task Force Member Zaldivar.
Hi, thank you. So I think I'm following with what Marcus was saying, to make two just straightforward recommendations. I would like to have to know that the meetings are the reflective of how often the complaints are with the police department. So if meetings need to be more often, this should reflect that because of more complaints, or less often if there's less complaints. However, I know there's other duties and responsibilities. I just want that to be in consideration. I also would like to agree with Marcus that the body of the review authority board, or whatever you want to call it, they should have a say on the firing, the hiring, and some of the disciplining of the police, because we have seen time and time again on the news that police allow the resignation to happen, and they benefit off of continued services that the public provides. So those are two official recommendations, and I just have two requests. Could if the delegators or Tish yourself, so Larry or Tish, could one of you provide us for clarification what laws are making it illegal and preventing this from happening? So I want us not to just spew, things out of our mouth. I want the proof. I want to see where we can see these things. And then two, this one's for Tish, and maybe even Police Chief Lally, if you could make available through Larry so that he could distribute the information and the previous work that you have done to look at a police accountability. So I remember the last meeting, we mentioned that this has been going on for a while. So I want to see the results of that work so that the task force can pick up that work, unless what is being presented us today is the final results of that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Task Force Member. And I've made a mental note, and we do have Cameron Hendrickson from my firm that's taking detailed notes. So we will make sure to provide as many of those resources as we can. I'll also just note that in work I've done on this topic elsewhere in the country, this notion of local initiatives running headfirst into state matters is a familiar one, for better or for worse. So you all are not alone in dealing with some of those issues. But thanks for your comments, and we'll be sure to follow up as quickly as we can. Task Force Member Ariola, and then we'll go to Task Force Member Horton. Karen?
Thanks, Larry. I would like further specifics, further panning out the anti-retaliation statement. In a world of tech, what does that mean? What does that look like for the safety of complainants? I think it is my understanding, at least for now, that those complaints can be done anonymously. Yeah, get that in writing.
That's a really great point. I just want to make sure I understand. You're saying you wanted to have explicit understanding of what protections a complainant would have from retaliation, including being, for lack of a better word, shamed on social media, for example. Is that what you meant?
Correct.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure I had it. Okay, Task Force Member Horton and Task Force Member Blaylark.
Good evening. Thanks, Tish, for that clear breakdown. It answered a lot of questions that I had. But I have two other quick ones, and it might be for Chief Lally. So in the presentation, it mentioned about being able to review the information if a situation came up. A lot of times what happens is the public has to wait a long time to review things. Would the board have the same quick access to the information that the police would have, or would we have to wait too? That's my first question.
No, and typically in these situations, because this board would be created by city ordinance and given certain powers, this board would have ready access to the information that it needed to do the work that they would be charter to do.
Okay,
they
so we would have
that
that.
access.
Okay, so we would have the access pretty much as soon as the police department would get it.
Yes, at least that would be my expectation and understanding.
Okay. And then my second question, and if it helps save time, maybe it could be presented later. But what's the current procedure now if something happens? I mean, I can take a guess on, but specifically, how is it set up currently?
Sure, Chief Lally, did you want to walk through that process? And actually, as you walk through that process a little bit, just kind of going back to one of the other questions that was asked about the complaint process, if you can maybe just take a few moments to talk about some of the changes that were recently made as part of the law enforcement reform that took place earlier this year. It did make some key changes in how complaints are taken and what's required and what's not required. So Chief, if you can kind of highlight some of those things and addressing this, that would be great.
Yeah, so to answer Charles' first question, so the process right now, and I also encourage everyone, I had talked about our transparency site at the last meeting. If you go on our transparency site, there is a there's a place specific for our complaints. And if you go in there, it gives links to the complaint form, which is online, how to access data, what our complaints are for this year, when they're resolved. There's also the community advocates that Councilwoman Powell had talked about. We trained a group of citizens, I want to say it was in 2019, late 2018, 2019. Marcus was one of them. Corey was one of them. There was about 4 or 5 other people. There is a number currently on our website for the community advocate. That number actually goes to Marcus's phone number. Marcus has actually brought people in through that process. So there's basically just to make it as simple as possible is if a complaint comes in to the police department, it comes in a variety of ways. Sometimes people fill out the complaint form, which is available online in Spanish and in English. They will then bring the complaint form to the police department. Sometimes they're mailed in, sometimes they're emailed in. So they come through just, a variety of sources. Once that complaint is in the department, and these are external complaints, so these are citizens who are making complaints. That complaint then makes its way up to me through the chain of command. And at that point, a determination is made whether or not that complaint needs to be sent to the outside investigative law firm that I previously talked about. So if the allegations are one of the few that I mentioned, so use of force, misconduct, civil rights violations, or any type of incident that would warrant discipline more than 3 days, those are automatically sent to the law firm. So the law firm then takes the investigation, and that process takes place. The also on our website too is this link to the city ordinance that provides all the information on how that process works. If the complaint makes its way to me through the chain of command, and it's something that does not fit into one of those categories, those complaints then are handled internally. And so depending on the severity, they may be assigned to the officer's immediate sergeant. It may be a lieutenant. It could be a commander. In some instances, it could be a deputy chief that does the investigation. So it just depends. Once that investigation is complete, depending on what the recommended discipline is, there is a pre-disciplinary hearing that is held with the officer. And at that point, a determination is made on any discipline, if any is warranted. This process happens in conjunction with our legal department. So I speak freely, quite often with our legal department. There's case law that dictates what type of discipline an officer should get. There's prior cases. So there's a lot of decision making that goes into a final disposition. And then ultimately, any type of written reprimand and above. So if it's a written reprimand, any suspension days, or any termination, that has to make its way through the legal department, eventually to the city manager, who signs off on that final discipline. And then it comes back to giving the officer their discipline. So the outside investigation, again, if it goes that way, they conduct their investigation. We eventually get their final report. But if it's internally, and I can tell you, we also generate complaints through the department. So if you go on our website now, I think external complaints this year, don't quote me, that might be 8 or 9 external complaints. And the rest are generated internally. So that's supervisors who are noticing some type of misconduct, some type of policy violation. And we are then starting the investigation. So that's us saying, we are noticing that, or this has come to our attention that an officer has violated some type of policy procedure, and then we start the investigation on our own. And so if you look at our website, it gives all the stats. We have far more internal complaints generated than external. On average, the dispositions are on there. How to file a complaint is on there. Links to the city ordinance is on there as well. So I think, Charles, did that answer your question? Okay.
Thumbs up. Thank you very much, Chief, for
You're
all the
welcome.
information, and Task Force Member Horton, thank you for your questions as well. We're actually capturing both questions, comments, and recommendations as we speak, and after the break, we'll show you kind of a visualization of that. I am going to call on Commissioners, Task Force Members Blaylark and Cordova, and then recommend a break if folks are amenable to that. So Task Force Member Blaylark and then Co-Chair Cordova.
Tell Chief don't go anywhere. I just got a question. First of all, excellent presentation. Excellent presentation. I got some questions, and also dealing with the bargain union. That I think that's where the problem lies. I also have been looking at talk with some people from Aurora who's on Aurora civilian civilian review board. And one of the things that they have said, and Chief, maybe you can answer me, how many calls, Chief, do you actually get a year? Just the calls, period.
Calls for service?
Yes.
I think we're at, I think we just hit over 50,000 this year. It's on our main transparency site. So I think we're at like 50,000, maybe 100. I just checked the other day. On average, on our high point, we were at probably over 85,000 calls for service. I think last year we ended up around 64,000. And those are just calls for service. That does not include the non-emergency calls or calls that come in outside of the 911 process.
That's a lot of calls, and you only get about 8 complaints. You only got about 8 complaints. And see, with those statistics, I think that, you're talking about a strong citizen review board. I think those are the kind of things that specifically getting intakes of complaints. I don't know if citizens feel well about complaining or what. However, I guess that's a whole another different subject. But I guess you guys are doing, you're doing a fine job. However, I do echo Marcus' sentiment, and this is just for Tish. I like the presentation, and I think that I don't know who would do this, but this specifically when you're talking about any abuse of police abuse. And I don't know. I need to probably take a ride with some of these guys, just see how they operate. And maybe you got a whole new cadre of different young people who don't have that old mental thinking of some of those people that Marcus just named. Maybe, and maybe they just want to, they're not a gang of blue, but they are just professional people who want to do their jobs. And so that's one of the things we may need to look at as being a task force. Sure. To look at, the personality, the personnel that we have already, and how they are functioning and how they do their job. However, let's deal with civil, Tish. I think that it's very important that we do, if we're talking about minority, I do agree with Marcus. Sometimes when we say minority, then we get all the other people and never get maybe 1 or 2 Black African-American people on there. And then we got to get people on there if in fact we're talking about that people are not afraid to complain. Because if you get somebody on there and they feel like that the Citizen Review Board is ineffective, then they won't come to it.
Appreciate the comments.
Oh, noted.
And can I just mention real quick too? So just looking on the transparency site right now, we are at, so I want to give you the exact numbers. We are at 50,242 calls for service as of today. Regarding our complaints, we have a total of 29 complaints year to date. 8 of those are externally generated, which means that these are citizens who make notification to the department of some type of alleged violation. And we have 21 internally generated complaints. And
Now,
those
when you say,
complaints-
Chief, when you say internal, what do you mean? I mean, those are police officers complaining about something that's happening within the force?
Yeah, so those are supervisors who are that conduct has come to their attention. And so we're then doing an internal investigation.
Okay.
And so out of the 29 total complaints year to date, 21 of those complaints are internally generated from the police department. So those are not citizens, those are the police basically, bringing it to our attention and handling whatever needs to be handled. And then also to your other comment, I would 100% highly recommend anyone to do a ride along with the police officers. I think it, would be a great experience. We are still operating in a COVID arena. However,
Sure.
we can make arrangements to make sure that people are comfortable. So I will throw that out to the task force because I 100% would love for you guys to do that.
Or Chief too, and I recommend this to Chief and Larry, that maybe randomly, can we just sit and just talk with some officers about, how they feel about being a police officer, how they feel about the community, and we want them to be honest and, somebody that will be honest about how they feel about the department and all.
Yeah, appreciate that. I mean, that certainly was a part of other task forces I've worked with to have police officers be in the conversation. So thank you for that. I see, I am going to go to Co-Chair Cordova, and then I do see Task Force Member Flickema. I'm just curious if it's a quick thing, because if it is, we can probably do it before the break. If it isn't, I might ask you to wait until after. Can you just share with me, is it a quick question or more of a comment?
Yeah, I just had a question.
Okay, I'll come to you right after Councilmember, or rather, Co-Chair Cordova.
Thank you.
So I want to thank Councilwoman Powell, Chief Lally, and all of the task force members for their great questions. I think that this discussion was very lively and I learned a lot. One thing that I had a question regarding the presentation was for Councilwoman Powell. In your recommendations for the membership of this board, you did include a attorney. I kind of wanted to know what the role of that attorney would be. Would they be a voting member, and would there be any specifics to the kind of practice of law that they kind of go into?
Oh, good question. We saw that in some of the other ordinances and police review boards that we took a look at. Some, and again, we try to keep this pretty basic so that, obviously the task force could be more specific or less specific, what have you. I can tell you that some of the communities specifically say they want an attorney who does criminal law, but does not, currently have any case, obviously you can't currently have any cases that would potentially come before this board. Some say that, you have to, be, obviously they would not be acting in their role as an attorney on the board, but just, having someone with that legal perspective in a citizen role, they thought that would be helpful to have someone there in that capacity. If that kind of, I hope, answers your question.
Yeah, that does. I just get a little bit tricky because of the fact that the city's legal team is supposed to be a supportive body as well. So that's why I was just kind of confused on between the two.
That person would not be providing legal advice to the board. No.
Yeah,
That would-
absolutely. Thank you. And then I just had some recommendations for the group to kind of keep in tail or to be noted. Some recommendations, if we do make this into a subcommittee, is to consider a community districting instead of just regular numbers for the membership of the group. When I look at other boards and commissions throughout the city, I tend to see that the people that are serving on those boards and commissions tend to come from the same neighborhoods. So I think that really amplifying other neighborhoods, especially the low income neighborhoods, to be heard through a body like this would be really important. And then that can also call into attention Marcus's points and others' points as to how inclusive are we really being with the citizens that are upon this board. I would recommend the removal of a council appointed chair. I know that our council is meant to be an independent body, not Democratic or Republican, but our bodies unfortunately do tend to sway one or the other oftentimes. So to instill confidence throughout the community, I would recommend that the chair be selected through the rest of the body as the co-chair would be as well. And then also, that I would incorporate the inclusion of employee complaints to be put into this review board, only because I know that I was reading about former Chief Womack. She went over to Florida and they were having some issues with employees not feeling like they were being heard by their administrative leadership. And I think that allowing this, so for example, a supervisor makes a complaint or files wants to instill a punishment on a subordinate and they don't feel like that punishment was up to par, they can have the option to send it over to the review board. So those would be my 3 recommendations for this body.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. And again, right after the break, we'll show you how we're kind of capturing each of these. I want to come back to Task Force Member Flickema, who said she had a quick question. I'm going to take her word for it. I do see Task Force Member Rivera's hand as well, and I don't want to ignore that hand, but I'm wondering if you think it's quick or if you think it can wait, and if it should wait till after the break.
You could wait till after the break.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Task Force Member Flickema, and then we'll pause.
Yeah, I just had a question regarding the anti-retaliation clause. There is wording in there that says will not be tolerated. So I would be curious to hear a little bit about, have you guys done any research or looked at all about what you mean by will not be tolerated? Because it could go in a lot of ways. And to me, it doesn't seem like Elgin's getting a lot of complaints right now, which could mean 1,000 different things, but the fear of retaliation feels like a really big variable to me. So I would be curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll be honest with you, it's something we recognize that's needed, and that's why we put it there. But in terms of completely fleshing it out and what it looks like and how it would be structured, that portion has not been done yet. But we recognize the need. We had to leave some, obviously, some definite work for, there's still a lot of work to be done on this. But we recognize the need and the importance of having something like that there. But how it would be structured, who would enforce, how it would be enforced, that has not been completely fleshed out. But we can look at, what exists in other communities. We can come up with our own and use a combination of both. But I think it's really important. And I definitely think it's something, obviously, we put it in there as something we needed to, flesh out a little bit more and include.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And then just a secondary part of this question. I'm sorry, I know I said I had one, but
no, that's okay.
Second one. And this one might be more for Chief Lally. I would be curious to hear a little bit about what measures are put in place right now in the complaint process for ensuring anonymity and ensuring that there's not retaliation that happens in the complaint process right now.
Chief Lally, I'll just ask you to be a little bit brief, just so I can give these folks a break.
Yeah, so thank you, Aubrey, for the question. Basically, one of the things that Councilman Powell had asked me to also follow up on, which ties into your question, is if you go online or complaints, you don't have to give your information. So that was something that changed per the Safety Act that took place July 1st. So you can anonymously submit a complaint without your name, without any type of information, and then it's still investigated. I can tell you that, my time as, in the command staff, so I was a commander for almost 7 years. I've been the chief for 3.5 years. So for almost 11 years, I can tell you, just knowing the, being privy to the information about internals, there has not been an instance during that time, and I can only speak for that time because obviously I'm privy to that information, where there was some type of retaliation complaint made after some type of complaint. And so when a complaint comes in and the investigation is done, we make contact with the complainant, send them a letter basically saying the complaint's been investigated. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please call us. In some instances, people will call. They have some questions about, how did this happen or why this? But retaliation I cannot recall in at least the time that I've been in command staff where that has come up. Now, I do understand the concern of the task force where, that is what's the hindrance to maybe people coming forward, because they feel like that might be a repercussion. And to that point, the anonymous complaint is in process. Also, you can contact a community advocate. You can have them come forward. We have had that happen. So we've tried the best we can to, to make the community know that, that will absolutely not be tolerated. And if there is something that that happens or comes up, to let us know and advise us.
Thank you.
And complaints don't have to be notarized anymore either. do they?
Correct. And the notarization was more of a formality, if anything. But yes, so you're welcome, Aubrey.
All right. I am going to just suggest 5 minutes to allow folks to, use the restroom and get a glass of water and that sort of thing. We're having a great conversation here. So I've got 7:23. Let's return at 7:28 and we'll continue. Thank you all. We'll return in 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, Larry, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I sure can. Yes.
What do you think about them Braves, guy?
Oh, man. It's funny you asked me that because I lost a bet with my colleague in Atlanta, and he made me make my Zoom background all day the Atlanta Braves.
Wow.
I got his permission. I'm on TV now saying this, but I got his permission not to use that background during this meeting. But now the whole community of Elgin knows that I almost had to put a Braves background here during our meeting tonight.
Listen, I thought anybody would win after they beat the White Sox like they did. I said the Astros going all the way. I said Larry got his wish.
That's what I thought, man. I thought so. I thought we looked good against Chicago, looked good against Boston, and then it was Atlanta's year. I mean, they were a team of destiny.
And at the mid-year, they were just a 500 club.
That's right. It's unbelievable the turnaround and how they got past the Acuna injury, all of that.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, man. I can't believe that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for helping me in my grief. Work through my grief. Task Force, we will come back. Thank you all for your patience. A couple of process check-ins. First of all, I do want to, once I get through with these check-ins, go to Task Force Member Rivera on this topic, so she'll be next. Secondly, I want to turn to, if she's back from break, where is she? There she is, Chair Krigler. I want to turn to you for just a minute, ma'am. As you know, and actually, Chief, if you're near the video as well, I wanted to check in with you on this. As you know, as the task force knows, we had put on the agenda tonight to discuss the K-9 program in addition to the Civilian Review Board. I have the feeling that we probably have at least another 5 or 10 minutes, if not more, that this group would like to say about the current topic. And I think that when we went past 8 o'clock a meeting or so ago, that left a few folks out of the conversation. And so I'm wondering what you and the task force feel about having the remainder of our meeting be devoted to the conclusion of this discussion on Civilian Review Board, and then hold the discussion of the K-9 program to our next meeting. So Chair Krigler, how do you feel about that?
I do think right now this particular issue is right now what is a major concern with everybody right now. So I do agree with that. I do. So I think we can hold off with the K-9 for the next time and finish this out. Yeah.
Sorry for the dad joke, but call off the dogs. No. Sorry. I see a couple of hands, so let me. I see Task Force Member Banner and Task Force Member Calamer. Marcus, briefly, did you have a comment on?
Yeah, we didn't request to hear about the program. The request was to see some specific video with specific people to see how the K-9s were used in those incidents.
I understand. Well, we have that noted. We will. There will be some information that can be shared about the program. I will tell you that there are restrictions on what can be shared in the way of specific incidents with this body or with the public, but we will certainly be responding to the request for information. But my main task at this
transparency.
Beg your pardon?
Accountability and transparency. They only show us what they want us to know, and then what we don't want to be known, we won't show it.
I hear you, and I understand the frustration. We will visit with you in between this meeting and next to work through how to make sure your needs are met, and also make sure the department can abide by what they need to abide by.
It's about the community not being abused.
I understand that. I understand that.
Say that. Right.
It's the community as well. I hear what you're saying. Task Force Member Calamer, I see Task Force Member Bailey as well. I want to be brief here, folks, because I had promised Task Force Member Rivera to speak. Go ahead, Tish.
Thank you. I was just inquiring, what's the status of arranging for Spanish translation of the meetings, public comment, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't know if Assistant City Manager Karina Nava is still with us. We had been working to make sure that meetings would be rendered into Spanish after the fact, and that folks who wanted to participate in Spanish I could do so. Now, I think we are trying to prioritize the eventual public meetings that this body will hold. I mean, these meetings, of course, are public, but I mean meetings that are specifically focused on community input rather than just your all's deliberations, but focus on those for simultaneous interpreters. So I don't know if Karina's in the room, but if she's not, I'll just say for the time being, that's my understanding in terms of what the city's been able to arrange, and there will be additional work done to get simultaneous interpreters for those events where we anticipate speakers.
And then I just have one additional comment. When it was mentioned that with translation, you run into the issue of a preconceived bias, perhaps on the part of the translator, and that may not be fair to the person who is speaking. I just wanted to say that any English speaker making a public comment, they could be anywhere from incomprehensible to eloquent, and they have the right to speak in real time, and they don't need to wait for a translator, and nobody needs to sort through bias, preconceived bias, et cetera, et cetera. We are perhaps disenfranchising Spanish speakers if they are made to wait for a translator. A UN quality translator, I offer to translate. You don't have to go with me, but anybody else on this body who does speak Spanish, between the 2 or 3 or 4 of us, I think we can come up with a consensus translation if necessary. And I think that would be more than adequate. Otherwise, how long do they have to wait?
Understood. Thank you for that input. And we will visit with staff off between this meeting and next and come back to you reflective of that concern, Tish. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so I just want to confirm that folks are okay with, after Task Force Member Rivera, sort of continuing and concluding the meeting tonight with a conversation about the Civilian Review Board, and then we will take up the K-9 program at your next meeting. So is that okay with folks? Seeing thumbs up. Any objection? Any concern? Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate
Larry,
Yes.
just one quick clarification regarding the. I'm looking for clarification. Is the discussion regarding or how the K-9 unit is used, as well as I know Marcus had specifically requested, I guess, some specific videos regarding how the K-9 unit was used. We're looking to do both at the same time.
Well, it's my understanding, Council Member, that there are, and Marcus, I see your hand. I do need to come to Task Force Member Rivera next. She's been waiting, but I want to say that it's my understanding that there are some, Chief, I don't know how to characterize it. Is it legal issues? I mean, there are some restrictions over how videos of stops can be shared publicly. Is that correct?
So, yeah, so Marcus, I don't know what incident you're talking about, but until I know that, then I can answer whether or not the video is available, because per Illinois law, body camera does not become available unless it's a flagged incident. So whether that's an arrest, a use of force, a complaint. So I can't answer that question until I know what specific incident, Marcus, that you would like, that you're talking about. So that if you can narrow it down, and then I can do my part to see what the answer is to whether or not the video could be public. Until I know what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we have more work to do to clarify that. And Marcus, I apologize that we haven't gotten to it yet. Trust me that we will.
So we don't need another great presentation. If we can't look at the specific incidents, then I mean, there's no need for the presentation. We might as well not even waste our time.
I hear you. Co-chair, can I turn to Task Force Member Rivera first? Okay. Task Force Member Rivera, very patient in waiting. So just to clarify, she's going to make her comments or questions regarding the presentation. I'll then see what Co-Chair Cordova wanted to share, and then we're going to share a visualization of some of the comments that we've captured so far and invite any task force members who haven't spoken, as well as folks who already have, to add to what we've already captured. Task Force Member Rivera.
Thank you, Larry. First, thank you, Councilmember Powell, for that presentation. It was very informative and thorough. Also, thank you to Chief Lally for the further explanation on the presentation. That was also very informative. The questions I have 3 questions. The first was about the subpoena capability for the review board. Is that a full-on subpoena? Like, would we be able to subpoena the 911 calls, mental health records, criminal history, radio traffic, any internal records that would indicate gang affiliation or not, domestic violence, addiction history, body cams? My second question is, are they required to sign NDAs or non-disclosure agreements because of the privacy issues and confidentiality? And my third question is, when does it start? When does it live, active, everything's approved, everyone's in place? When does that start, or is there an anticipation date for when that will begin? And I look forward to the K9 presentation next week as well. Thank you for being so patient and rescheduling that.
Cynthia, before I have the questions answered, I'm just helping one of our other team members capture everything. I captured the extent, your question around the extent of subpoena power. I got that.
Yes.
Can you repeat the second and third? And I just want to get it right.
Yes. The second is, due to the confidentiality, are NDAs going to be part of the whole citizen review board to protect confidentiality, the non-disclosure agreements? And the last question was, when will it start? Oh, and one other item is, I really appreciate the internal efforts for the complaints. When you said 29, that 21 of them were handled internally, that speaks volumes with, you're already trying to handle it within, so it doesn't get out. So I just really appreciate that effort, and thank you for sharing.
And Cynthia, sorry, I'm so sorry. I keep asking you questions. When you say, when would it start? Do you mean, when would this body begin
The
its?
Citizens Review Board, yes. Like, when is it going live? When is that day for effective date?
Like
I know
January
there's a lot of
2022
legwork.
or something. Okay,
Correct.
got it.
I just want to know,
got it.
when is that happening? There's just been so much legwork. I would really
For sure. And this is a good time for me just to mention, and I'm being very careful here. On the YouTube live stream, we have there is a chat enabled. This is a City of Elgin YouTube stream, so we haven't done anything with it as a facilitation team, but it is enabled, and I'm not going to read all of the comments there. The task force will have access, but one of the comments was a question about how does one apply to be considered for such a body. So I just want to make Councilmember Powell aware of that at least one person watching was interested in that, even though the body, of course, hasn't been formally created yet, but we'll give you the information about that, what's on the chat that's already public after we're through. So I just want to make folks aware. So we had a couple of questions there, and I don't know if Councilmember Powell is able to answer them from Task Force Member Rivera. There were 3.
Yep, and I jotted all of them down. Thank you for the questions. Again, that is something, very good questions. Again, that can easily be fully incorporated into, whatever this task force puts together and moves forward as a recommendation to the council for final implementation. So there really isn't a set start date yet, because again, we started doing this work, goodness, a number of, quite a while ago. And then when it became apparent that this body was going to be formed, we knew that, this would really kind of need to be taken up by this body, so we kind of got it started, and, giving it to the task force to, do whatever else they feel needs to be done to it to move it forward as a recommendation from this body. So NDAs, I think it makes sense. I know that looking at some of the other communities, because of the confidentiality, I'm not sure if they went so far as to require them to sign an NDA. I know they had them take an oath. But if it's found, some of the other ones we saw, if it's found that a board member violated confidentiality rules or anything like that, they can be removed by their board members or by the council. Let's see, what was the other thing about subpoena power? That may be more of a legal question, but I'm assuming when it said subpoena power that it included a lot of the things that you mentioned, but that might need to still be clarified. And again, the date to start, it all depends on how quickly and this moves forward from this body to recommendation to the council and for implementation by the city council and staff.
Thank you very much, Councilmember and Cynthia, for your questions. Okay, so just checking in, I've got 4 hands. I'm gonna call on them all. We're also at about a quarter until the hour. So just want everybody to be mindful of that. Doesn't mean we have to hard stop. I want to respect the fact that some folks may have to leave at 8 o'clock. So I'll encourage folks to be succinct as best they can. Co-Chair Cordova, please.
Yeah, so I just had a recommendation because I know that we're tabling the K-9 conversation for the next meeting. Chief Lally, I don't know if you're able to answer this or if this is existing. I would really appreciate if you could provide a video like the Collaborative Crisis Unit just created about the proper procedure and how the K-9 is used in any given situation. I know that's really specific case by case, but like just a general overview of your procedure with the K-9 unit. I think that would be beneficial if there's any way we can be provided that before the next meeting. So that way we get some visual perspective of what we're going to be learning. That's just my recommendation. Or if that's already existing, I would love to have that.
I don't think I can get a video, as good as the one for CCSU in 2 weeks. But this evening I was going to provide you guys just with a really high level about what the K-9s do, how they're trained, who the K-9s are, some data. But, I could, let me kind of work on it, and talk to our K-9 officers and see if we could come up with something of visual. And then again, if Marcus, if someone could, whether that's Larry, get me the specific case, I could start doing my research there to figure out what we can do to try to answer the questions regarding that specific incident.
Thank you, Chief Lally.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Okay, so we've got Task Force Member Battles, followed by Chair Krigler and Task Force Member Brockway. Go ahead, Corey.
How you doing? Quick question with the collective bargain agreement. When the next one will be?
Good question. And Chief, please jump in if I misspeak. We just completed the current collective bargaining agreement goes through the end of 2022. And they're typically 3-year agreements.
Okay, so I asked that question because we're talking about the Citizens Review Board. Will we be able to get this issue at the next collective bargaining agreement on time?
So negotiations with the labor unions typically start at least 6 to 8 months before the end of the expiration of the contract. So if that's something that this body wants, included in the collective bargaining agreement, that would be the time to do it.
Absolutely. Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yep.
You bet. Thanks for the question. And for what it's worth, I mean, I don't know whether the role of the union in the police department is explicitly, I don't recall, Councilmember Powell, whether it's explicitly spelled out in this body's charge, but certainly there's a lot to think about as it relates to the role of the union in the operation of the department and the way officers conduct themselves. So we can potentially set aside some time either with the union or just to discuss that topic if it's part of their charge. Okay, Chair Krigler and then Task Force Member Brockway.
Okay, I think this question is for Tish, Councilperson Powell. The question was asked, and I don't know if it got missed, was how how did you all really come to everything in regards to going through the citizens here in Elgin? Did you send something out asking them what they actually wanted in this program? Because it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like you guys went all out into other cities, and I understand that, but this is Elgin, and we're wanting to have the police department, the police department serve us. So I'm just wondering, was there some sort of packages that you sent out to the residents asking them what they would want in this Citizens Review Board, especially those that have been negatively impacted by the police within the years of their operation? I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, it is a fair question. And over the years, we've had a lot of different community conversations. A lot of the folks that are on this task force have been part of community conversations where this very topic has come up. And that is how we got feedback from people that have been actively involved in this process, in telling us over the years their concerns about policing in this community. So we did take, whether it was people coming to city council meetings and speaking their piece, sharing information with us individually, sharing information with us at those community conversations and protests and things of that sort. That is what we use to, come up with this, but also within the, looking at using what other communities had like as a guideline, because I say that because if another community has it in place, then it obviously kind of it passed the muster of Illinois state law. So we knew that at least if it was something that was in place in another community in Illinois, that it was legal in Illinois. So that's whether it's the community task force, not the task force, but the Civilian Review Board, or a number of other things we do as a city. We commonly look at what other communities have done and don't necessarily totally recreate the wheel, because obviously state law trumps a lot of what we do at the local level. However, that's kind of like the process we did and the input we got from the community to get to this point. The other citizen component putting this together is you all sitting right here, the 18-member board that are all citizens of this community that will have final say of what ultimately moves forward for final recommendation to the council. So as I mentioned before, we started this process before this board was even thought about or planned to, be an inception. Once it became apparent that we were going to have this board, we knew that it only made sense to run this very important component through this task force. If the task force wasn't in place, this would have probably gone through a couple of different of our boards and commissions. One, the Human Relations Commission, which is a citizen-based board, and or the Fire and Police Commission, which is involved in the hiring process for our fire and police officers. So in the absence of, if this task force didn't exist, there would have been citizen input at that level before it would have been implemented.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is because there's a lot of citizens that don't get involved, and it's not that they, don't necessarily want to be involved. It's a matter of some of them out of fear that they don't, and they think it's going to be some sort of retaliation, and they're scared to speak out. So, and then a lot of them too just have no confidence, in what the cities would do in setting up these type of boards. So that's why I asked the question.
And let me just add in, if I could. You know, part of the scope of this body and of our work on your behalf is community engagement, specific for your work, meaning to collect input from the community about your work. And one of the things that could be done here is perhaps, whether it's this full body or a subcommittee, could formulate questions to ask to the community in reference to this topic. And then whether it's at public meetings, whether it's in an online questionnaire, whether it's in smaller group discussions, canvassing, I mean, we'll talk about the strategy. But that is very much a part of what you all are meant to do, is to extend this conversation beyond just the 18 or so of you to the community at large. So, Chair, I just want to make sure you know that I'm hearing what you're saying, that it should be not just, you know, wait for folks to come, you know, but also do proactive outreach and look for those comments. Task Force Member Rivera, I just want to make sure that's an old hand. I see your hand up. It's not an old hand? Oh, you've got something else. Let me go to Task Force Member Brockway just because he hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll come to you and Task Force Member Haben. Again, mindful of the time. We're at about 7 minutes till 8. Go ahead, Task Force Member Brockway.
Yeah, sorry about being a little bit remiss. I was just going through the transparency site, Chief, and it's an amazing tool. The question that I have then is, in the complaint process, in the listings, right, you have basically 3 options of what, or I'm seeing 3 options on the transparency site: exonerated, sustained, and then other. And so I'm curious as to where those other 5 the full 5 categories come from. Those other 3 just fall into the other category that are not complete?
They're not completed yet. So just you're looking at the completed investigations. So the dispositions of those specific cases. So you could have a case that has another disposition. Those are just the ones you're seeing that are completed.
So then the other means what? It can be, those are the unfounded, or?
Yeah, it could have been administratively closed. I have to see which specific one you're looking at. That's the other, but if you look at like 2020, so there's 2 years of data on there because we just built this transparency site. You'll see all the different categories in 2020 because those investigations, most of them, except I think for 1 or 2 that are still out there, have been completed. So those are just the ones that are completed, and that's what ended up the disposition for those cases. The other categories are they're in there. They just haven't been used in a case yet.
Gotcha. And then the last thing I want to kind of echo Marcus about regarding the makeup of a review board like this is, I appreciate the impulse for diversity. And, you know, you look at this, the way the council identified persons for this task force, it's a wide range of persons in terms of ethnicity and gender, education, community engagement kind of. And I appreciate that. I can also imagine a way in which those numbers, as they're broken down in your presentation, Councilwoman Powell, is you could have a lawyer, all your minority representatives in gender, and then still have 4 white guys on the rest of the commission on the review board. And so I'd really encourage another way of thinking about how to do that might more reflect the community. It might also more reflect region, like Ishmael pointed to, but also it could reflect the percentage of interactions with the police department. Just in a way that, finding a way to do that diversity in a way that actually reflects the community and doesn't get short-circuited the intent as well.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the makeup of this particular body that, you know, this task force, because I know that there were some questions I saw online about the makeup of this task force and why it looks the way it does. And I made a statement at one of our council meetings that specifically said exactly what you said. We were very intentional about the makeup of this task force. Yes, it is diverse, but we also were very intentional about including groups of people, or the group of people that most commonly have interactions with the police, which, if you look around, we have several Black men on this task force. That was not by accident. I heard everything that was said. I completely agree. And understand, but again, this is more work that the task force can do to tweak that. And I know that that is, at least I can speak for myself and probably several of my colleagues that feel the same way about a review board that would be put together to ensure that the people who are having the most interaction with our police are the ones that are represented. So we are very mindful of that. And you can get as specific as you want.
Yeah. Thank you, Task Force Member Brockway, for the comment, and Councilmember Powell. I'm pausing here just for a process note. We are just about at 8. Could I just get a notation, a thumb up or something if you have to leave at 8 o'clock? I just want to get a sense for who, if anybody, we might lose if we stop at 8. I see Task Force Member Rivera, so I definitely need to call on her next. I don't see anybody else. So folks, my recommendation would be that we plan to stop at 8:15, that we do our best to get to the hands that are up now and fit anybody else in by that time. Is that okay with everybody if we go till 8:15? Just think it'd be good to get the remaining comments. I also just want to make some space for anybody who hasn't spoken. We've actually heard from, I think, all but a very small number, but if anybody who hasn't spoken wants to be heard, you certainly are invited to. I also, just before I get to Task Force Member Rivera, I want to share that we're going to give you at the end of this meeting a couple of ways to add your input. If you don't have time to in this meeting or aren't ready, we've got a couple of methods for you to be able to do that, and a way to continue the conversation. Task Force Member Rivera.
Thank you, Larry. I apologize for having to leave at 8. I have class, and I do
Okay.
watch the last portion. I go on YouTube and I make sure and rewatch just to stay in tune with everything. I have 2 questions. The first, Councilwoman Powell mentioned that they're waiting for the input from this task force regarding the review board. My question is that for our full term, like our full cycle, and then once our input is submitted, what is the anticipated turnaround time for, after our recommendations are in, for this citizen review board to be fully active and operational? And secondly, Mr. Battles mentioned the collective bargaining agreements, and because I'm very new to this, I just wanted to know a little bit more about that, or even if it's an email, that's okay as well. But it seemed like a very pivotal time when our input, the collective bargaining agreements, they seem to kind of go hand in hand. So I just want to get some more information about that at a later date. And like I said, it could be via email. But yes, that's with our input. Is it going to be quarterly or just our full term and then the recommendations, or how will that all work? Thank you.
So if I'm understanding what you're asking, just kind of going back to something that was said at our earlier meetings, the task force is expected to make rolling recommendations. So it's not like we have to wait until June or May to make a final recommendation regarding this, regarding the formation of a civilian review board. I think I also heard, and I believe it was co-chair Cordova make a recommendation, or I think it may have even been Denise Haben that recommended that we, this would be a perfect topic to do as a subcommittee, so that more intensive work can be done on it, and a final recommendation can be brought back to the full task force to be, agreed upon, to move forward to the city council for their review and consideration. At that point, what I would anticipate, can't guarantee it would work like this, but what I'm anticipating is that the general framework would go to the city council based on what comes from this task force for approval. We would then ask our corporation council to codify that into an ordinance that would create this body. That would then be brought back to the city council. Usually takes several weeks to do that for approval. And then we would go through the process of creating an application process advertising for people who are interested in serving on the task force, conducting interviews. People would have to go through the training. Again, just speaking to some of our partners in some other communities that have gone through this, once it is approved by the council, the actual ordinance, usually I think they had their first meeting about 6 months after that final approval, because you had to go through the application process, go through the training, and then once everyone did all of that, that's when they were able to start their first meeting and take complaints. If that answers your question.
I think it does, and she's got to run to class.
Okay.
3 cheers for being a part-time student, Cynthia. I was
But
that
Larry,
for a long time.
Larry, she did answer the question about it. Maybe she can't about collecting bargaining because
Well,
that's a pivotal point.
Yeah, I think
most of the complaints that come through, even if the chief say that a person has been disciplined or will be disciplined, they can go to the collecting bargaining. And as you said, you got an arbitrator, because I used to do this for the city of Elgin. And if that arbitrator, finds in favor of that person who's disciplined, it doesn't make any difference.
Right. No, I've
what Corey was saying.
It was, and I think we certainly have to take into account the role of the renegotiation of the collective bargaining agreement in this, and we've noted that. So I appreciate you reiterating. So the hands I see are Task Force members Haben, Chair Krigler, and Task Force member Zaldivar. Let me just, for one quick second, I just want to real quickly, thanks to Sarah Omar on our team and Cameron Hendrickson on our team, you'll notice kind of like a virtual sticky board here. We've essentially been trying to capture questions. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I thought now I can see your screen. I had a moment that I couldn't see your screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So essentially it's like if we were in person and people were writing on sticky notes, questions, comments, recommendations. I want to offer this up to the task force, but I want to check with the city manager, city attorney about how we use a board like this. I want to make sure we're respectful of open meetings laws and so forth. But if folks have comments that don't get heard tonight, another option would be to send an email with those comments to Policing Task Force at cityofelgin.org, Policing Task Force at cityofelgin.org. So we'll check and see whether we can make the board something that the task force uses between now and when we talk again. But if not, we're going to keep capturing the comments here and we can add them as we get them going forward. So many thanks to Sarah, Cameron Hendrickson, and others for the support there. Okay, so Task Force member Haben.
Thank you. I think my question or my suggestion is for Chair Krigler and Co-Chair Cordova. Can we move ahead and create a subcommittee to work on this, to continue, to continue the work that and go forward? Because if we don't get started, we'll never get done. And so this is a, sort of a process question.
I think Task Force member Haben may have mind reading powers. She read my mind because I was going to ask the same question. Let me do this, Denise. Let me just see what Chair Krigler wanted to share first, and then Task Force member Zaldivar, and then we can come back because that was going to be my question to the body as we left. So Chair Krigler, and then Task Force member. Oh, he took his hand down. So just Chair Krigler.
Okay. So my question now was. Be it that we were talking about the diversity on that particular committee, then why the number? What is it, 7? Why can't there be, somewhere maybe not the 18 that we have, but a little bit more? I think is where you're going to get a little bit more diversified. But that 7 number doesn't seem to be fitting at all. So
and
how
I made it real clear when I said that's just a start. This committee can make it larger if they want to. But the recommendations, when we talk to other communities, that you didn't really want to make it so large that it was going to be difficult for you to operate. But by all means, you're not limited to 7. That's, again, this is for you all to massage, make changes. If you don't like 7 and you want to do 9, the only recommendation I would have is that you keep it, you need to have an odd number.
Yeah.
When you put together committees, you want to have an odd number. So if you want to do 9, 11, yeah. So don't get hung up on that.
Yeah. When I saw it, I thought at least 9, 11 would be great.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, what a discussion. I mean, I'm really gratified by how much you all contributed to this, and for Councilmember Powell and Chief Lally for all you laid out and shared, both about current and potential future review. Let me come back to Task Force Member Haben. I'm going to sort of ask you all a 2-part question, and I want to get your sense here. First of all, could I see thumbs up as to whether or not folks believe, oops, my camera went out. Sorry about that. Let me try that again. 2-part question. The first part is, would you support the formation of a subcommittee that would essentially dive more deeply into this topic, come up with some recommendations, and bring it back to the task force for consideration? So would you support a subcommittee on the Civilian Review Board topic? I don't see any objections, just checking. And so then, thank you. And then the second question would be, I need to check with the city manager about our limits on a number of folks that can be part of that, but I would love to just get expressions of interest now. There can also be expressions of interest conveyed over email or after the meeting. But could I see a show of hand if you'd like to serve on a subcommittee that looks at this Civilian Review Board topic? I'm seeing Task Force Member Haben, Flickema, Banner, Blanchard, Cordova, Battles, Calamer. Have I missed anybody? Bailey, Krigler. Anyone else want to express interest?
Larry, if it's okay for me to interject, are we limited to the number of subcommittees we could participate in, or how is that going to work?
No, there's, thanks you for the question. I mean, there's, to my knowledge, and again, I'll check with the manager and the attorneys, but I mean, I don't know that there's any limitation on subcommittees you join. I just need to find out whether there are limits on the number of members that we can have on a subcommittee. I don't know Illinois law well enough to know that, but no, I don't. You could serve on multiple subcommittees, absolutely. So our note takers should have captured all of the names of folks who expressed interest. We also have this recording. Go ahead, co-chair.
Sorry to interrupt. I would like the facilitation group to reach out to Cynthia to see, and anyone else who had left at 8 o'clock to see if they would also be interested.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for noting that. Yes, for both for Cynthia and Penelope, we need to do that. I want to just summarize where I think we are. I think we've had, as I say, a great conversation about this topic that would be continued by a subcommittee. We will work with the city staff to just see whether there are any limits on the number of members of that subcommittee. And if there are, we will communicate with the folks who expressed interest and see, how we can appoint folks to that. If there's anybody that, is very determined to be part of it, anybody that's willing to step back, if there are limits, we'll get that subcommittee together based on their and our availability, whether it be between now and the 18th or subsequent. Certainly if it's possible, and if we are in excess of a quorum of this body, I would say the meeting would be a public meeting, just like what we're doing here now. I know that this body, cares as deeply about transparency as anything. So the point is just there are some logistics to work out, but suffice it to say, we will act swiftly to try to stand this subcommittee up, to determine which members of our team can support with some facilitation, and then get you all together to dive more deeply. And again, anything that comes out of that subcommittee would come to the full task force for review. It's not going straight to the city council. I see Co-Chair Cordova's hand. So go ahead.
I believe Denise had something to add to her original statement.
No.
Okay. So what I was going to say before we voted on that, which I think is great, I think that it's a subcommittee that is essential to our duties. I was going to ask the group their consideration that Chair LaJewel, myself, and spokesperson Blaylark can come up with some recommendations for other subcommittees to be put into place. What I was going to recommend, because we are meeting on Tuesdays weekly, I was going to recommend that we review the ordinance before our next leadership meeting, and then come up with some recommendations for subcommittees for the next meeting that we can all vote on, whether they can start getting implemented right away. Again, with the kind of perspective that we're not meeting every week and we're not meeting in person, we have so many other topics to discuss before the final recommendations. I thought that we can kind of go ahead of that. And as the leadership that was voted into, I thought that would be something that we can do kind of on the side parts.
All right. So we'll potentially look for some update from Chair Krigler, Co-Chair Cordova, and spokesperson Blaylark forthcoming. As I mentioned, we also appreciate the chief's patience and will work on a presentation related to canines at the next meeting. We're also, as a team, going to work with Task Force Member Banner to make sure we understand the precise parameters of what he'd like to cover there, and make sure that anything that comes back to the body is reflective of that. I do see 3 hands, and I also see my clock. So I'm just going to ask everybody who's got a hand up that needs to say something to be as concise as they can be. Task Force Member Haben first.
No, I don't have my.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Powell.
Yes, I believe in Councilmember Shaw or city staff that's there. I believe the quorum limit is 5 for a subcommittee. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 5 that can be a part of that, and just need clarification on since Councilmember Shaw and I are not voting members, if we are counted in. I don't think we're counted in that 5. But just looking for some clarification from staff who is there so that we can just at least get that answer today. I really like Vice Chair Cordova's idea to, bring forward some ideas for some additional subcommittees, because I think that's important to keep people engaged and get some of this work kind of parsed out to some different groups so that you can really start to dig in. Because I was excited when I saw the group of folks that, that are here. I just don't want any of you to lose interest. And I was getting a little concerned about how slow things were kind of going along. So I'm glad that, we've got chair, we've got a vice chair, we've got some real meaty stuff for people to really dig into. I really appreciated all of the conversation today. And this is exactly what this task force is supposed to be doing. So looking forward to the work. Sorry, but I believe it's 5. If staff can confirm that.
Chief Lally, is Manager Kozel with you still? I know he was here at one point, but I don't know if he still is.
He is, but he does not know the answer to the question.
Okay.
But
5 was the hypothesis we were working with. So we'll just follow up. Councilmember, we'll be sure to get that information out to the group as quickly as we can. Okay, so that leaves Task Force Member Banner.
So to clarify, over the years, community members have come to me complaining about being held while they bring the dogs out. And the dogs will walk around the car without any hit. And then the officer would do a gesture or something or hit the car to cause the dog to react, and then say they got a hit on the car for some type of drugs. Then the officers would proceed to rip their car apart and find no illegal drugs. So that's what I want to look at. And there's specific incidents with specific names. And then also a couple years ago, I had a guy come to me where I have his records of going to the hospital where they sicked the dog on him. And it really disturbed me that in 2019, that we're still sicking dogs on citizens as if it's 1950s and the 1960s. So I was very disturbed by that, and I would like to see those videos to either disprove that those officers are misusing the canine dog to tear people's cars apart, and also the fact that they sicked the dog on somebody and had the dog biting on a human being for whatever reason.
Understood. Again, we'll further clarify in between now and the next meeting, just to make sure the chief has exactly what she needs to be able to be responsive. All of a sudden, I got 3 hands, or I got 2 hands. Councilmember Powell, is that an old hand? Did you want to say something else?
Nope, that's an old
Okay.
one. Sorry.
Co-Chair Cordova, did you want to say something?
Yeah, before we depart, I would like to wish Task Force member Brockaway happy birthday today.
All right.
Keep up on that note. So.
All right, that is a good note to end on. I also just want to say thanks to you all. Didn't see as much of Sarah, Norma, and Joe, or Cameron, or Sheila, all members of our team. You didn't see as much of them tonight. That was not the design. This was not meant to be as much of me as it was. For football fans, there was a little bit of an audible at the line of scrimmage in terms of how we managed things tonight. So I was in the seat a little bit longer. So I look forward to my colleagues being more at the center of things, along with the chair and the co-chair and the spokesperson going forward. As of now, we are scheduled to meet again Thursday, November 18th at 6 p.m. Thursday, November 18th at 6 p.m. And for any member of the public wanting to make sure they keep up with this body, it's cityofelgin.org/task force. cityofelgin.org/task force. The Spanish translations of the transcripts appear to be up to date as of now. And so folks who want to see the transcript in Spanish will be able to go there. On behalf of the rest of the facilitation team, thank you all so much for a great meeting. Have a good night.